So I also want you to know that we have another exhibit in this area, Candida Hoffer, who was a German photographer who went to Mexico and took some amazing large format photographs of buildings, architecture in Mexico. They're just stunning, and you can stand in front of them and feel like you're inside the building itself. So if you have time after the O'Keeffe exhibit, you may want to spend some time in this exhibit as well. But we're going to walk around to the O'Keeffe exhibit. So the name of this exhibit is The Beyond, Georgia O'Keeffe and Contemporary Art. Yeah. And one of the reasons we can think of it as the beyond is that we're going beyond Georgia O'Keeffe, and we're bringing in these other artists to look at their work, artists who are working right now. There are more than 30 artworks by O'Keeffe in the exhibit, and some of the really well-known iconic pieces. But we also have 20 other artists who have produced 50 pieces of art that are also included in this exhibit, and we'll look at some of those as well. So let's walk in and see some O'Keeffe. So this is really what we're talking about, isn't it? Georgia O'Keeffe, and of course one of her most well-known artworks are the flowers that she did, these really large flowers. I could stand in this gallery all day long and look at these incredible flowers and enjoy them. But first, I'm going to talk a bit about O'Keeffe herself, and I'm going to point out some things about her life on this timeline. So, Georgia O'Keeffe is one of the best known artists of the 20th century. She was born in 1887 and she died in 1986. She almost made it to be 100 years old. And you can see from that that she almost perfectly spanned the 20th century from 1887 to 1986. And during that time, she produced artwork throughout her lifetime. She decided that she wanted to be an artist when she was in her teens. She began producing art then. Her art was started to be exhibited in 1917, and so she produced artwork throughout that very long life. So you've seen a lot of her work. And there's a lot of it to be seen. So perhaps one of the reasons that she's one of the best known artists. Now, some people have said she's one of the best known female artists. And how do you think she might have felt about that? Well, she said, why can't I just be an artist? Why do we have to put that qualifier on it? Female. Why don't you just talk about me as an artist? Now, she did have some formal art training, including training at the Chicago Art Institute, but after that, she had to make a living. And so she became an art teacher. She went out to Texas, West Texas, actually, the Plains, and taught there. But while she was there, she began to experiment with abstract artwork herself. And she began to produce these charcoal abstract pieces. She sent them to a friend of hers, and this friend loved them, took them to New York City, and showed them to a gentleman named Alfred Stieglitz. You might say the rest is history. Alfred Stieglitz is known for two things. One, he was a very fine photographer, and perhaps one of the people most responsible for seeing to it that photography became an art form, became known as an art form. But he also owned a gallery. And he was exhibiting in this gallery some of these new modern painters. And they would become very well known when they were exhibited in his gallery. So her friend showed him her pieces, and he fell in love with them. And he began to exhibit them. She came to New York, and he fell in love with her. They began a relationship that later became a marriage in 1924, And they were together until he died in the 1940s. But this is when she then began to become very well known. He actually took photographs of her since he was a photographer. So, and I love that they include this photograph of Georgia O'Keeffe, because this is the Georgia O'Keeffe that I know. This is the one I recognize. Her as an older woman in the Southwest, picking up the skulls and things in the Southwest. I don't know that I would have recognized her in this younger picture, but he took many photographs of her. She spent a lot of time with Stieglitz and his family in upstate New York. Everyone knows about O'Keeffe and the Southwest and the time she spent in New Mexico, but a lot of people don't think about that when she was much younger, she spent a lot of time in upstate New York, a very different landscape. But in the 20s, she made her first trip to the Southwest, fell in love with it. In the 40s, when Stieglitz died, she moved permanently out to New Mexico, and that we really think of her as being part of that Southwestern landscape and being out in the Southwest. In the exhibit are some wonderful videos of her walking through that landscape, picking up items that she uses in her artwork, and you may want to spend some time with those videos because they're very nice. But now let's talk about the flowers. So she painted these flowers for a very long period of time. She started painting them when she was in upstate New York. This one is from the 30s, for example. And these two she would have produced when she was spending that time at Lake George in upstate New York. The Stieglitz family had one of those family compounds where everyone in the family would come together in the summer, and they would all spend the summer together. And so she would spend her summers in upstate New York. She actually planted a flower garden up in upstate New York, and these flowers would have come from her own flower garden. Now, why flowers? Well, she said flowers are so small, and these flowers in particular are very small. They're 2 to 4 inches. She said, we tend not to see flowers, and I want people to look at flowers, so I'm going to make them large. And so she makes these very small flowers, very large, so that we can see them. Now, she does an interesting thing with these. So she enlarges the flowers, and then she crops the flowers. She decides which part of it she wants to include in her piece of art. And that makes us think of photography, because when she was painting these, it would be photographers who were doing those things. They would be enlarging their photographs. They would be cropping the photograph. Now, we can do that on our phones, right? We can take a picture and we can decide to enlarge it, or we can crop out what we don't want and include what we do want. But at that time, it would have been mainly photographers who were doing that. And she learned about this, I'm sure, from living with and working with Alfred Stieglitz. So these were early on flowers. The one over here on the right is later, and that is a flower that is native to the Southwest. So again, she painted these flowers for a long period of time during her lifetime. Now, you may have heard that many people have suggested that these flowers actually reference female anatomy, and that they have to do with female sexuality. Now, that may have happened because these photographs that Alfred Stieglitz was taking, some of these he took of Georgia O'Keeffe in the nude, and sometimes he posed her in front of these flower paintings that she was making at the time. And so that might have lent that idea to some people that this is what she was doing. What did O'Keeffe have to say about that? She said adamantly, that is not what I am doing. She said, if you're seeing that, that's on you. She said, I am painting flowers. Now, in the 70s, we had this feminist movement going on in this country and elsewhere, and many members of that movement really embraced the flowers and embraced that idea of the flowers and also promoted that idea. But Georgia O'Keeffe was not doing that. So now let me tell you a bit more about the exhibit itself, and that is that it is organized around several different themes or categories. One of them, of course, is flowers. And so we're going to see a couple of contemporary artists who have also done work of flowers with some different ideas and messages. So this is one of my favorites, and I think one of the things that impresses me the most about standing in this gallery is the incredible color that you can see in her flowers. And these are different, but I think that same saturated color is also in these pieces of artwork, and I enjoy them for that reason. Now, this artist also had a message, though, and you may notice that some of his flowers are tulips, and you may recall that when tulips were first introduced to Europe from the Middle East, and they were introduced to the Netherlands, there was this huge boom in tourists. Everybody wanted to own the bulbs, the tulip bulbs, and it became a bubble, a financial bubble. They began paying more and more and more for these tulips, and eventually everything collapsed and people lost a lot of money. So he's referencing that with these tulips, and also perhaps referencing the fact that maybe that's what's happening in the art world right now, that people are paying more and more and more for artworks, and can this really be sustained, or is this going to be a bubble? So he has a bit of a message there. This artist, Jennifer Packer, in this particular piece, and some of the ones she's doing, a series, she's doing funeral flowers. So the flowers you might see at a funeral, and she's referencing the idea that we are having a lot of funerals in our country right now. We're having mass shootings, we're having a lot of people die, and she wants us to think about that. With her pieces. And then we have this very interesting ceramicist. So she works in clay, and she's here with the flowers because she said, you know, usually when people think about female artists and they are using flowers, it's some kind of interior design piece that they're doing. They're doing dishes or teapots or wallpaper, and she said, so I'm going to just use clay and put those images on just the clay. I'm not going to make it into something that's utilitarian or useful. Just going to make you think about the art itself. And I want to point out to you that when you go outside, when you leave the building today, there's a wonderful piece outside on our building. It's a mural of flowers. And this artist came here, she walked through our park, she saw what kind of flowers we have here, and she chose the flowers that she wanted to use. So when you leave, when you go out the door, go around to the left and look back toward the building, and you'll see this wonderful mural that she has put together with some of our North Carolina flowers. Now, we're going to walk into another gallery with a different theme or category, and this theme is finding the figure. I'm just going to say, this is the R-rated section of our exhibit here. So there are some pieces of the human figure. One fellow docent said to me, I would not be comfortable walking through there with my parents. So I'm not going to stand in front of every artwork in there. I will show you 2 or 3 pieces, but I hope you'll feel comfortable to come back and see some of the others. One of our docents asked a very good question, I think, and that is, why do you think that the curators who put this show together decided to use as one of the categories the human figure, if Georgia O'Keeffe almost never included the human figure in her pieces? We don't know the answer to that. They didn't tell us, but perhaps the reason is that there was a period of time in her life when she did produce paintings of the human figure, a series of paintings that she did in watercolor that were of the human figure. Now you'll notice we only have one of those pieces, partly because there are very few of them, but partly because they are watercolor and they're much more fragile than pieces that are done out of oil. There are conservation protocols that say that pieces on paper, pieces in certain kinds of materials can only be shown for short periods of time. And I'll even tell you that when the docents came in to see this piece, it was covered up. After we left, they covered it back up. So it has to be protected. But we do have here some other pieces of her human figure watercolors that you can see. You can see she did do some nudes. But what I'd like to get to, if I can, not very good at this technology. Ah, nope, one more. Well, there we go. This is the one I wanted to show you. So as you look through them, you can see that there are several examples that she did of the nude human figure, but then she took much of that same color and the same material that she was using, the watercolor, and she just made an abstract. And this is something that she would do throughout her career, throughout her lifetime. She would move between doing things that were somewhat representational, things that you could recognize, to doing something that was more simply abstract. And I think you'll see that as we walk through the exhibit and see some of her pieces. So I will say just a few things about this artist. Now, we said it's finding the figure, not necessarily the human figure. And so you might think of these pieces as some kind of alien figure, or he himself has talked about them as doodles. And I like that because I just retired from a very long career in which I spent a lot of time in meetings. So I did a lot of doodling. And what he did was take those doodles and he made them three-dimensional. Mostly he used wood to do that, but if you look carefully at them, you'll see that he also used some other materials, fabric and some other things that he added to them to make these very strange alien figures. Now, he is one of two of the artists in the exhibit who actually said, I was influenced by Georgia O'Keeffe. She was one of the artists who influenced me. And one of the things I see an influence in is that color, that incredible saturated color that he added to his pieces. And that is really interesting when you know that he is colorblind. So he put together these very colorful three-dimensional pieces, though he himself is colorblind. So I'm going to stand in front of this picture. So this interesting artist, she has done something interesting. She has used paint, oil paint, but she's also used fabric to put together her figure, which she calls an avatar, and she references digital figures in putting that together. But the thing I want to say about it is we had this teacher of the docents, and she told us she's about to end a very long career as an art historian. But she told us that, you know, when she was in college, she started out wanting to be an artist. And then she decided, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. There's no new way to do things. And so she moved away from being an artist herself and to study artists and be an art historian. But I think we could say to her now, some of these artists have found new things under the sun to do, and one of the ways in which they have done that is by using new materials to add to their artwork. And here's another artist who has done that, these two pieces on the wall here. Now this is the second artist in the exhibit who has said, I was absolutely influenced by Georgia O'Keeffe. And if you know her work, I think you can probably see that in her work. And we'll definitely see some pieces later in the exhibit that look very much like her pieces. But she has said, unlike Georgia O'Keeffe, I am referencing the female body in the pieces that I'm making. So even though this is called Yellow Mountains, and we'll see some of Georgia O'Keeffe's mountains that look very much like this, she has said, I am actually referencing the female body. Other things she's done is use some very interesting materials. So here she's used some foam to make the middle of her piece here to divide things out. And she's used sawdust to build up the painting. So if you look from the side, you can actually see a thickness to that. It's not just paint, it has sawdust in it that's built up the painting. So she's found something new under the sun to do also. And then we'll see several pieces by Monica Kim Garza. Very fun pieces, I think. She is a multiracial artist, and she is showing multiracial models in her pieces, and she has wanted to show them doing normal things. She's shown them cooking, she's shown them being an artist, painting, and then here showing them playing. And so very playful pieces, very happy pieces, I think. So the next category is going to be, well, it's called the Intangible Thing, and we're going to talk a bit about Georgia O'Keeffe doing abstract paintings. We saw those charcoal paintings that she did very early on in her career, and we talked about how she went back and forth with that. This is another early piece, 1917, and this piece, I think, shows that one of the things some artists were doing in the 20th century was playing with color. They were putting colors together. They were seeing how they interacted with each other. They were seeing how when you put certain colors together, it makes them pop out at you, or maybe it makes them recede from you. Sometimes when you put colors together, you get another color. So here, if we put our red and our yellow together, we get orange. But then she also always or often references the natural world. This is the evening star. So what she's saying is where we're getting that color is from the evening star. If you go to our permanent collection, we have a Monet that does the same thing. It has a sunset, and that sunset colors the sky and the water and everything else in the painting. So she's allowing that color to do this. Here we have just an abstract, like that one we saw on the pad over there. And then here we have the wonderful colors that she's playing with, but with a spiral figure. Some people have suggested that this spiral actually is like the end of a musical instrument, so a violin or a cello. But this is a figure that she will use more than once in her lifetime. And in fact, I believe we can see much of that in this piece. This is a sculpture by Georgia O'Keeffe and I'm very excited about this piece. I had never seen a sculpture by Georgia O'Keeffe, so I think it's exciting to have this in our exhibit. So we have the spiral shape, but she also wanted you to think about negative space. So yes, she used metal to put this together, but part of what makes the design is the lack of space, or the lack of the metal, just the negative space that you see there. And of course, here we have, it's oil, but it looks much like those watercolors that we saw earlier. But what she's done here, and you might want to take notice of this line that she's put with her color on either side. We'll see that again in her pieces as we walk through the exhibit. And we have one of our contemporary artists here. She has made color such that you can walk right into it. She takes a squeegee, again, something new under the sun, and puts her color onto these panels where you can practically walk right into it. But what I love is these primary colors right here in the center that if you stand in certain places, they disappear. You have to stand right in front of them in order to see the primary colors. The other thing she did was use the color of the floor at the very bottom of those primary colors and the color of the ceiling at the very top. So wherever she is, she incorporates that into her painting. And we're going to see several pieces that are included in the abstract section of the exhibit, but I think you can see that they might have been included in other parts of the exhibit as well. I sort of think of them as pretty realistic representational trees that are a little more abstract. You could see them just as a design or as trees. And then here, abstract figures, even though they really come from a maple and cedar tree in Lake George. And again, these pieces are from the time that O'Keeffe spent in upstate New York in that very different landscape from the Southwestern landscape that she eventually moved to in New Mexico. Here is one of our videos, and on the other side of the gallery, there's a room that has a video going on. You may want to spend some time with those videos because they show O'Keeffe walking through the landscape and picking up some of those found objects that she does paint. And it's really fun to feel like you're part of that landscape with her. Now we're going to walk through these three-dimensional pieces. This artist uses metal that she then covers with linen fabric and then paints. And she has said that you can think of these as an alphabet, although it doesn't look like our alphabet. And so I think what she's wanting you to think about is the fact that if there's a language that you don't know, and especially if it's a language that uses an alphabet that you don't know, the alphabet, the letters in the alphabet just look like figures. And so she wants you to think about that. And our school children are having a lot of fun walking through the alphabet to get to the rest of the exhibit. So we'll walk through here. And this brings us into another part of the exhibit, another category, and that is the still life. But we still have several abstracts here to look at. Now, these are probably among the most popular pieces in the exhibit. The folks at Crystal Bridges Museum that put this together said that probably more people spent time standing in front of these works of art than anything else in the exhibit. So, and I find them very interesting. This is my favorite, I think because of the color. and perhaps that's why they included them as being influenced by Georgia O'Keeffe. These are photographs, and they are pretty much photographs of color, because what this artist does is he has this very large aquarium full of water, and he takes paint and he squirts it into the aquarium. And he actually has studied fluid dynamics. And so what he wants to see is what happens when that paint hits the water. And then he snaps a picture of it. So he says there are only 2 times when there is human interaction with the artwork. Once when I squirt the paint into the aquarium, and once when I take the picture. But he has come up with some amazing artworks. This one I think really looks like a waterfall. And this one really makes me think about flowers, even though it's not exactly a flower and is abstract, but it has some of that same beautiful color. Now, these are still life paintings by Georgia O'Keeffe, and Georgia O'Keeffe painted some different kinds of objects in still lifes. When I think of a still life, I think of bowls of fruit, vases of flowers, and we have a whole gallery over in our permanent collection of some wonderful examples of that kind of still life. She uses different kinds of materials in her still life painting. And when I was thinking about showing these pieces, I read something interesting about the still life. It was saying, why do artists want to paint a still life? And it said, well, it's because when you have several different objects, the light hits those objects in different ways, and it makes shadows in different ways. And so the artist can really show his expertise in the way that he shows the light and the shadow in those items. And so I think, when we look at her pieces, we can think about how she did that. Here we have a skull, we do have a flower to reference some of her earlier work, and we have it on the skull. But you can see how she's showing the light and the shadow in this piece in her still life. Now, she painted a lot with skulls and bones. And she said, it's not because I'm fascinated by death. It's that I'm fascinated by the shapes. They're really wonderful shapes, and that's what I'm trying to show, not necessarily that it's a skull or a bone. And where was she getting all of these bones? Well, in the 1930s, you may recall, there was a terrible drought out in this part of the country, and a lot of animals died, and so there were a lot of animal bones when she went out into the countryside for her to find and pick up and bring home to paint. So she brought home things all throughout her lifetime, and when she was in the Southwest, that's just one of the things that she brought home. This, I think, is a wonderful example of that, where she really wants to show you the shape of this bone. This is a vertebra, a part of a backbone, and she's shown it beautifully, but it almost looks like a bird hovering in the sky, almost like it has a head here. And then she's done the mountains in the background, so she has this very interesting perspective. The bone very large in front, and these mountains very small behind. A really different kind of perspective. She has a lot of paintings that she did of stones, and again, some people said, oh, they're rocks, how exciting can they be? But when I thought about them and thinking about that idea of painting the light and the shadow, that made them much more interesting to me, to see how she painted that light and shadow in these stones that she picked up along the Colorado River when she was out in that landscape. And then I'll show you several more pieces here to show you that this is something that she did throughout her lifetime. This was done in the 20s. These two, this one from the 30s and this one from the 40s. So this was something that she did throughout her lifetime. But look at this wonderful shadow of the feather behind there. So wonderful job of showing us that light and shadow. This again is from the 20s. She has used this African mask with an apple. This was at a time when a lot of artists were becoming very interested in these African masks that were showing up in the Western world. Picasso is one of the artists that we associate with using those masks quite a bit. Here, she's just used it as part of her still life, so something she might have had in her home that she wanted to paint. Here, her feathers, she might have been in Lake George when she found those, the bird feathers and the leaves that she would have found there, very different from the Southwestern landscape. And then we have a very interesting artist, Anna Valdez. So the word I think of when I show this piece, I think, is camouflage. And that's because she did this wonderful floral wallpaper for us, which also makes us think back to that artist who was saying a lot of times female artists use flowers in interior design pieces. Well, she's done that. She's made wallpaper for us. And that is one of 3 pieces that was produced specifically here for our museum's showing of this exhibit. So Anna Valdez is an anthropologist and archaeologist, and one of the things that she likes to think about in her studies is people's possessions. How do we decide what we want to keep with us in our homes? And then she uses a lot of those pieces in doing the still life artworks that she produces. And we might have very high art. We see that lovely vase. And we might have very low art, like the prism or the very simple ceramic pot. And then also the natural items like the skull and the shells and so forth that she's shown here. But here she's shown us her study. And because she's an artist, we see the art books that she would be using, and we almost have several pieces of art within the one piece of art because she's done some little pieces from art history that might be in the art history books that she has at home in her study, as well as the natural plants. We see her paintbrushes that she would be using, and then maybe some things that interest her, like the lace or the shawl that she might get inspiration from when she's doing her artwork. So in the next part of the exhibit, we're going to talk about landscapes. And we are going to see some of O'Keeffe's landscapes from the Southwest. Now, remember that piece that we saw earlier in that abstract gallery that had that white line between the color? Here she's using it again, but she's using it to show us these cliffs. Also, we saw that young contemporary artist who had the yellow mountains on either side, and here we have a very similar piece by Georgia O'Keeffe. Think about where you are in this painting. You're really down here because she wants you to feel overpowered by these cliffs coming out over you. So she's giving you that perspective. And then very excitingly, we are going to see our Georgia O'Keeffe. So this is the Georgia O'Keeffe painting that belongs to the North Carolina Art Museum. And as you know, we are a state art museum. We were started back in the last century when our state legislature appropriated $1 million to purchase art. Very forward thinking. Then we received $1 million gift in art. And ever since that time, our curators have been filling in the niches for artwork that we want to have in our museum. So this is a piece that belongs to the North Carolina Art Museum. You can come back and see it in the American galleries after this exhibit closes. So this is a piece that O'Keeffe did. It's a building, not just a landscape, but notice where she puts the building. Remember that cropping that she did with the flowers? She brings that building right up front and in your face, almost going off the edges of her canvas here, and coming up out of the landscape, probably referencing the fact that it's an adobe building, and of course adobe is made out of the sand of the Southwest. She was very interested in architecture and buildings. I also like the fact that she has this nice little perspective here where it really looks like a door you could walk right into. Of course, what most people ask about is that little figure that's in that window. What is that? Some people have suggested that it's an alien, maybe a figure, but I think most people have come to the conclusion that it's a plant, a cactus plant, that is in the window of the piece. Then we have, she was fascinated by the architecture, by the adobe architecture, and so here we have the side of a building with a door in the building, and really it's just color, but she's managed to make the side of the building out of really just 2 or 3 colors that she's put together. Now we have this really exciting young contemporary artist. Remember, nothing new under the sun. Well, this artist found something new. This is one of those artists, and I'm going to reference Impressionist artists, where when you stand back from the piece, you see a scene. But when you stand right up in front of the piece, you really see kind of blobs of paint put onto the canvas. And how did she put that paint onto the canvas? Do we have any bakers here? I admit I am not a baker, but I have a cousin who makes the best sugar cookies in the world, and I have watched her do what this artist did, only she did it with icing. This artist does it with paint. You know, the canvas that you can put icing into with a little nozzle at the end? That's what she uses. She puts her paint into that and she squeezes it onto her canvas. So she builds up the paint and gives it that illusion that she wants. She also is doing a southwestern landscape like Georgia, but where Georgia O'Keeffe tended to do the mountains or the adobe buildings and so forth, she's actually doing more like the Palm Springs landscape. So these might be houses with swimming pools and maybe, people trying to conquer the desert and live their well-to-do lifestyle in the desert. And here we have an artist who is also giving us a message. She is a Middle Eastern artist, and she has said, I sometimes feel as though I'm trying to bridge 2 cultures. I'm caught between the West and the East, where I'm from. And so here in this one painting, we have that. So we have the Western world, looks like maybe a skyscraper with all of its lighted windows here. And here we have the East. We have the symbols that you might see in the tiles from the Middle East. And where is she? Well, she's right up here on this bridge between the 2, feeling caught between them. So we have another artist that has shown us architecture, and it's wonderful that they have placed them here where you can see them, but you can also look over to Georgia's paintings and see her renditions of architecture. So we know that she did that wall with the door in it. And here this artist has done a piece of a building with a door and a window in it. And then here we have several windows. We had something that you could see through the window. This artist has put some things. Now they're more recognizable. We have a lamp and a person inside these windows that are part of this architecture. And then I have to tell you, I'm very partial to this piece because I am originally from Oklahoma, and this artist is from Oklahoma, and he works in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa is a charming little city in northeastern Oklahoma, has a lovely Art Deco downtown, sort of like Asheville. It had an Art Deco downtown that was never torn down and rebuilt. So it's a charming place. And when I saw the slide of this, I thought, well, yeah, it's nice. But when I stand in front of it, I really like it because it has depth to it. So like some of our other artists, it's not just a flat piece. He uses collage. He uses paper and pencil, and he builds this up. And interestingly, he does it outside. So he takes his table out with all of his materials, and he stands on the street corner and he builds the piece on the street corner. And if you were in Tulsa, you could go and watch him doing it. Maybe I'll have to try that next time I'm home. And then this stunning wall full of very small landscape paintings. Again, fascinating concept. Young artist who said, I'm going to take a road trip, love road trips. She said, I'm going to make a big circuit around the United States, and every 25 minutes, no matter where I am, no matter what is there, I'm going to stop, I'm going to take a photograph, and then I'm going to paint that. So we have her entire trip up on this wall. And you may want to come back and spend some time looking at some of these because they're really fascinating. And I found this piece. This looks like something you might see on a road trip, just an old barrel, oil barrel, out in the middle of nowhere. Not something you think an artist might want to do a painting of. But what she saw at that time. And then we have some wonderful mountain landscapes, some plains landscapes. And then I love how she's played with perspective here with this tree where she's right up on that trunk of that tree, just like Georgia played with perspective at times. She really brought that right up into your face. So I hope you'll enjoy coming back and seeing some of her paintings that she put together. And then we have some of O'Keeffe's Southwestern landscapes. This one in particular I love because this really shows you, remember early on when we saw all of those blues and greens, and yes, we have some green here, but she really has moved into those Southwestern colors, that burnt sienna that she would see in the landscapes in the Southwest. And so she's really made that move. Now, are you ready to see another iconic O'Keeffe piece? We'll be over here. So this is the Radiator Building, very well-known O'Keeffe piece. It was done in 1927, and the really interesting thing about this piece is it was done just a few years after this building went up in New York. It's really hard to think now about that time in New York City when all of these huge skyscrapers were being built. They were new, because now, of course, they just seem like they've always been there when we go to New York City. So she's done a nice job with her skyscraper here, with all of the windows, with the lights in them. A bit of New York City with our smoke here coming off one of the buildings. And then she references Alfred Stieglitz here by including his name in it. We put it here with a younger artist showing us a cityscape, showing us a skyscraper, but in very different colors, wonderful almost pastel colors. And she says that she references colors from television, late night television or game shows. So I don't know if you watch game shows or not, but some people recognize the game show that she used for this piece. If you look at these panels down here at the bottom, this is evidently Wheel of Fortune, where the letters are turned in the panels. So Wheel of Fortune is the foundation for our skyscraper in this piece. And then here she has some more abstract pieces using those same colors, and even one that picks up a flower for us. Now we'll go to the end of Georgia O'Keeffe's life. And the other reason that this is called the Beyond, that is the name of this section and the name of this painting. So at the end of her life, Georgia O'Keeffe was doing a lot of traveling. She was being invited to a lot of places to come and show her work and talk about her work. So she was doing a lot of flying. And she was looking out airplane windows. And so these paintings are referencing what she was seeing when she would look out the windows. So the sky and the clouds and all of that, and then thinking about what might be beyond what she is seeing out the sky. Sadly, at this point in her life, she was losing her sight. She had macular degeneration. She had only peripheral vision. And so this would be the last piece that she would do unassisted as she became older and could not see as well. But you see some of the same colors that she's used in some of her earlier pieces. And before we end, I'm going to point out that we have this little almost tunnel here that you can move out of when you leave the exhibit. And this is done by a contemporary artist who is clearly fascinated by color. And he wanted to take wax and build it up and put color into that wax. And he is one of three artists who created something specifically for us here at this museum for this exhibit. One was the wallpaper, one is the mural outside, and then one is this tunnel that you can walk out of as you leave the exhibit. Now, I'll also point out that in the corner of the exhibit back there, there are some computer pads that if you are interested in a particular contemporary artist and how they do the work that they do, you can go and learn more about those contemporary artists by using those computer pads. But that's our exhibit, and I hope you've enjoyed it.